This is Karen on newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. And today, my guest uh, is speaking to me tomorrow. Well, okay, so she's on the other side of the world in Australia. And before we came on, it just dawned on me, wow, it's 5 o'clock in the evening, Wednesday, my time. And it's 9 o'clock in the morning or thereabouts in Australia. And it's like, I've never talked to anybody in the future. And we're going to do that today. My guest, her name is Elizabeth. Is it Dykos?
Diakos.
Oh, okay. Diakos. And what amazed me about her bio, um, and I think I could certainly relate, she started out as an educator and then she left education and she started a coaching business helping others to leave the education arena. And I just have to tell you, Elizabeth, my parents, that was their one thing for me. You're going to go to school, you're going to get your teaching credentials, you'll teach for 25, 30 years, then you can retire. And I remember looking them in the face and said, not me. Now, do I like helping people? Yes. Do I do corporate trainings? Yes. But it's not the same as being in a classroom day in and day out. So, welcome to Avoid the Maze and give us a little background like, why did you go into teaching and why did you decide to leave?
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me on the show. I actually started teaching quite late in life. So I have 5 children. And so I was at home looking after them until I was in my early 40s. I already had a degree from the dark ages, from when I was, 18. And that was in drama and psychology. And so I used that to go back and get my teaching qualification because they let me I ended up doing drama and English as a second language on the strength of having done 1 year of French in my undergraduate degree. So they let me teach another language. And so that enabled me to get my teaching qualification. But in the meantime, I'd also studied fine art. So I was able to get a job then as a performing and visual arts teacher, which was like dream job for me. I couldn't believe my luck. It was 3 days a week in a primary school. And I had visions when I went for the interview that I'd get a grade 6 class. And I'm like, oh, that's going to be so much fun. And they gave me prep, which is like the first year of school. So I had 180, I think. Is that right? No, am I lying? Wait, 160 preps, like a Groundhog Day it was. There were 8 grades of kids and over 3 days. So I was just crammed in 100-minute classes each, one after the other, until by about the 5th class, I couldn't even remember. Like, did I tell you guys this already or not? I was I was in a daze.
I can
It took me
imagine.
the whole year to learn their names because they all kind of look the same. I mean, I don't want to insult any parents about the beauty of their children, but when they're that little and their uniforms are all baggy on them and they kind of all look a bit similar. And so it was challenging, but really, really fun. And I got better over time. So after about the 3rd year, I felt like I'd found my feet and I knew what I was doing. And I was able to manage the classroom a lot better and able to manage the resources and not run out of stuff and not run out of time at the end of every class,
Sure.
which was what was happening. And so, yeah, I finally kind of felt like I'd landed. And then I started running an after school music program with one of my colleagues. And I was really, having a good time. But what I found over time was there was a lack of respect from some of the students, but that wasn't really the big issue for me. It was more from my colleagues and the lack of acknowledgement of the hard work that we were all putting in. No one ever said thank you. No one ever was grateful. And then the clincher for me, well, probably there were lots of little things. I describe it as a death by 1,000 cuts. There were all these little slights and things. Like one day my principal went into my classroom while I wasn't there, and I'd emptied the cupboards out in this big drama room because no one had done it for I don't know how many decades. There was all these resources, that had been there for years that were out of date or that, were old catalogs and broken musical instruments. And I was trying to sort through it all. And she came in and rearranged the room. And I'm like,
Oh,
what are
wow.
you doing? She said, your room's a mess. I brought parents in and the room's a mess. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm cleaning up 20 years worth of junk, you know, while I'm teaching. And I was just I felt like just violated, you know, there were
Sure.
all the, anyway, so lots of things like that showed a lack of respect. And then I was running this after school music club and playing ukulele. It was so much fun. And I had these little kids I called them the ditzy chicks because they were a bit ditzy. You know, they weren't really there for the ukulele. They were just there to have a chat. But we had a lot of fun together. And there were some kids who actually could play quite well. And they went to my colleague who was an actual musician. And so he taught the good kids and I had all the new kids. And it worked out really well. And the money that we took for doing that, we charged them $6 a week, and so $60 a term. And we used that money to subsidize the art budget. And I was loving that because it meant I didn't have to worry about scrimping and saving. I managed the budget for the whole school, and you know, it was pretty tight. But this money, it boosted the budget by 20%, the money from the ukulele class. So it was a really big bonus. And then someone embezzled some money somewhere else unrelated to us, and they put a ban on anyone. You couldn't take money from a student unless it went back to that same student. So you couldn't distribute it elsewhere. And so it made it so frustrating because we didn't need to give money back to those kids.
Right.
They were fine. It was actually money. It came because we were giving our time for free. That's why there was money lying around. Anyway, so it was just another thing. And it was so discouraging, you know. And then, you know, anyway, if there are any teachers listening, I don't need to explain to them the sense of overwhelm. And I know COVID's just, you know, really ramped that right up. And now there's the post-COVID lack of social skills in a lot of kids and those kinds of things, where it's really quite challenging just managing classroom now in a way that it probably wasn't even when I was teaching. Sorry, I feel like I just went off there.
Well, you know, and as I'm listening to you, I have a number of friends who are teachers, a couple who have just they stretched it out so that they could get to their retirement age and retire. Um, and the things that I was hearing that I don't remember hearing in my younger days was, you know, I spend my money for the school. And yet I'm supposed to be grateful that I'm getting a paycheck, but I'm using a good portion of that paycheck for my kids. And I do it because I want to give them the best of me. And that's what it sounds like you were doing. You wanted to give them the best. And the only way you could do that, number one, was to have an atmosphere where they could work in without a bunch of junk around them. And, you know, $6 a week for a program. I mean, I'd send my child twice in a day if I could, because that's not a lot of money. Everybody can come up with that kind of money. So you finally got frustrated and said, hey, it's time to get out of this.
That's right. So I started looking for jobs, and I also went and studied. Now, I wouldn't recommend this to everyone because I think it probably was, I could have got away without the study, and I would have therefore not had the debt that I now have from that. But I went and studied the Master of Applied Positive Psychology, which, if you're familiar with the work of Martin Seligman and the idea of flourishing and well-being, it was really focused on that. And I figured rather than doing more study in education, I'd actually try and it wasn't misaligned with education, but it was certainly opened up other opportunities and other vistas for me. And so I went and studied that, and I met a great tribe of people. And while I was studying that, I got offered an interview with a not-for-profit to run a homework club. And it just happened. The interview was on the day that I had lectures in the city. And so it made it really easy for me to sneak off and go to the interview and come back without my boss knowing that I had an interview in the middle of the day, miles away from where the school was, but I was already in the city for the lecture. And so I got that job. The pay was terrible, and I didn't know at the time when I started that it was only for 40 weeks of the year. I didn't get paid the full year. But anyway, it was like a stepping stone for me to actually get out, and it gave me some experience in a different sector that was, much more kind of corporately oriented, I think, than schools are. And then I got another job with Teach for Australia, which is like Teach for America. That was just a short contract, 5 months. And that really was a great opportunity as well, to do some more coaching. I started doing coaching in the masters and loved it so much. I went off and did a graduate certificate in organizational coaching after that. So fast forward to now, all those little experiences along the way, first of all, meant I didn't need to use my principal anymore as a referee or a reference for my job applications. So that was a real bonus, because a lot of teachers get stuck there. They've got an animosity with their principal and they can't leave because the principal won't give them a good reference. And so that's one way around that problem. And also I'd done a little bit of volunteer work in my local community, just, little festivals, and nothing really significant, but it's all on my resume.
Sure,
And so
absolutely.
on paper, you can see that I'm into community. I'm still interested in education. I'm into well-being. So you can see that on my resume. And then I started, the coaching was really lighting me up, and I started coaching like teenagers, and then I did some undergrad, some graduate uni students. And someone said to me, "Why aren't you working with teachers? You would totally get that audience." And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, great idea." And so about 4 years ago, maybe it was 5, I don't know, COVID's done me, and I can't remember how long ago anything was now
You're
because of
right.
COVID.
Yep.
I started working with teachers and just helping them to consider the possibilities outside of the classroom and look at the options that were available and have the confidence to actually step outside of their comfort zone and, be able to look at alternatives to teaching. And even a lot of them still go back, but they go back knowing that it's not all there is to life. And I'm happy with that. And I just had a conversation. I've just been to Perth. I'm in Melbourne, but we had a week holiday in Perth, and I met up with a friend who became a client. And she said to me, "I know that I'm working in this sector, but," she said, "I also know that I need more balance in my life, and I wouldn't have ever got that unless I had those conversations, those coaching conversations with you." So there's definitely a positive impact, from just, I guess, giving people the tools and the just bolstering them, just backing them and saying, "I will be your champion for a little while you pluck up the courage to step outside and do something different."
Well, teaching is one thing, coaching is another. What I love about coaching is that typically you're meeting somebody else who has sort of traveled your road before, especially if you do your homework while you're looking for a coach. Um, and the couple of coaches that I have worked with, that's what I look for. You don't have to have traveled the exact same path. You don't have to believe in my beliefs, but I want you to be able to understand it so that when I say something, you're not looking at me like, why would you want to do that? Um, but coaching has grown so much, and it's not necessarily about the person, coming to see you and saying, "Yeah, I'm coming to meet with Elizabeth because I don't want to teach anymore." Well, maybe you don't want to teach anymore, but then through coaching, you realize, well, maybe I can teach differently. Maybe my attitude can change, because not all of us can pick up on the day we say we don't want to do this anymore and just quit. Now, I did that in corporate America, with the guidance of my husband and my younger son, because when I came to them and told them, I just can't do this anymore, they realized I'd been saying that for over 2 years. And it was like, okay, there's the door, walk out it.
Yeah. Well, I had a similar conversation with my husband. After I finished the Teach for Australia job, Oh, well, I hadn't quite finished, and I was waiting to see if they were going to renew my contract, and I wasn't really worried either way. But I said to him, if they don't renew it, I still don't want to go back to teaching. So I was still on the books at my school, and he said, "Okay, I'm sick of you being miserable and complaining about it all the time. Just, okay." And I ran. You could see the vapor trail as I ran out to the kitchen, got on my computer, and whipped up a resignation letter. I printed it off, and I was at the school the next morning at 7 a.m. because I knew the boss always was there early. And that's probably not early in the States, but here we start at 9 usually, so that's pretty early. And I gave her my letter, and she actually cried. And she said, "Oh, I blame myself." And I'm like, you know what? This is actually my decision, and this is about me wanting what's best for me. Now, I felt along the way maybe there were some things she could have done differently, but by and large, I felt her heart was in the right place. But for me, this was totally about what I needed and what I wanted. And then I went off to work because I was still working for Teach for Australia at the time. And that was very satisfying and liberating. And then that began that journey of, okay, now what? Now what do I do next? Yeah.
And
And
so
I
look,
would,
yeah.
yeah,
So
go on.
luckily you had this very supportive husband. Okay.
Oh,
Not
definitely.
everybody
Yeah.
has that support in their family. Um,
Mm,
and I knew my husband was supportive, but I didn't know how he was going to support a decision so drastically. I was the major breadwinner at the time. We were both in education, but he was um, back in school. We were both back in school getting our masters, but he was looking to become a director. And he kept telling me, until I get there, we need your income. And the day that
mm,
I decided to quit, it was like, I'm sorry. And he goes, you know what? You've been miserable.
mm,
And I
mm,
rather that we find a way to get through this rather than have you keep doing it and getting angrier and angrier. And I
mm.
didn't realize I was showing all that. But as soon as
Yeah.
they said it, it was like, that's when the guilt hit me, like, oh, how did I do that? But then met my first coach, and the coach said to me, "You've got a whole path in front of you."
Mm,
And at the time, I was doing podcasting on the side, and I was writing blogs for companies on the side. And she said, "So did you not like your corporate job, or these other jobs bringing you down?" And I said, "Oh no, I'll stay up all night long to podcast. I'll stay
mm,
up all night long to blog." She goes, "Then you made the right decision."
mm,
And
mm,
then I had to, think it through. Um, but for those of you listening, coaching is not about Elizabeth or myself to say, hey, just get out of it. We're here to listen. We're here to guide. Um, you're going to make those final choices.
mm,
And that's
mm,
what I think is so wonderful about coaching, and the fact that it is a growing um, occupation, because so many of us have realized that we're not happy. And how do we find that happiness?
mm. It's the first time I ever did it. My client was one of my fellow students in the course, and we had an observer and the client and the coach, and I watched her go from being hunched over, her face down, and very upset, telling her story, to just like opening up, like, and her face tilted up like a sunflower opening to the sun. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what just happened? I love this process. And I totally got hooked that very first day. And that's why I went off and did more study, because I just loved the process so much. And I think it's really valuable when you just you're dealing with someone who's so stuck in the what's been going on for them. Often my clients are older, more mature teachers. They've been in the game for 25 or 30 years, and they haven't written a resume for decades. They haven't had an interview for years, and they just are so overwhelmed by the idea of trying to leave, that it's just really hard for them. And I guess I have a slightly more entrepreneurial spirit, and I was open to the possibility of leaving, but I also wasn't in there for nearly as long. I only stayed for 8 years. And when I started, I was 42, and they laughed and said, "Oh, you'll have to wait 8 years for a birthday cake at this school. It's such a big school. We only celebrate your 0 birthday. So, when you're 30, 40, 50."
Ah,
And I just laughed and said to myself, there's no way in the world I'm still going to be here when I'm 50. And I got nearly to 50, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am still here. What's happened? How did this come about? Because I thought I would get a job in a high school and teach more senior students or something. I just never expected to still be there. And so I started working out how I was going to get out. And so I did actually work it out before I turned 50, which was very satisfying. So I didn't get my birthday cake.
well, you know what? I'm sure the family gave you a cake, or you made your
I,
own,
I,
huh?
I was just fine.
Yeah. I always laugh about celebrating birthdays at work. The corporate job I was in I was there just short of 10 years. And on my 8th year, um, they decided to bring in a birthday cake. And my birthday and my mother's birthday were 4 days apart. So my whole life, we shared a birthday cake. I don't ever remember having my own. And they brought in this birthday cake, and I just stood there and cried like a baby.
Oh,
And I left the room because number one, I didn't really want to be there anymore. Number
yeah.
two, I don't know what it means to have my own birthday cake. And trying to explain that to individuals. And I think that was just about the time that I started thinking about, I love what I do, but the culture, I can't do it in the culture anymore. And
Mm,
that's how I knew that podcasting and being a coach advocate was exactly what I needed,
mm,
because I could listen to the story. I could
mm,
then guide you. Okay. Well, I know this coach, and yes, she's in Australia. However, now we have Zoom, now we have Teams. There's all different ways of being coached. And they would look at me and go, "You mean I can just talk to somebody about this?
mm,
They're not
mm,
going to go into my childhood and say, 'Oh, when you were 5 years old.'" I said, "No, it's
No,
whatever
it's about
you need."
moving forward.
Yes, exactly.
Mm,
So when you made this change, and I could see as you're talking, you brighten up when you talk about it.
mm.
How did your family, I mean, they supported you, but how did they really feel about, hey, this is a new mom?
Yeah, look, I think it wasn't so I actually rented out an art studio and did an art project. I had long service leave money, which was like from being working for that long, I had accumulated some, I think I had about I don't know, 10 weeks pay up my sleeve that I could get cash in. And
Right,
so I used that to rent out a studio. And then I also, while I was doing that, I picked up some work um lecturing at a university, like a sessional academic. I wasn't really lecturing, I was tutoring. And I tutored undergraduate students who were training to be teachers in how to teach the arts. That was really fun. I really enjoyed that, but I hated the marking. Oh my gosh, it was horrendous. And so I did that for about 3 semesters, which was, just a nice opportunity, good money. But it didn't really, so then I started coaching in earnest, and I started out by doing free, like I did payment in kind. So I swapped my services. This is when I was working with the high school students. I swapped it for, so like I do coaching with the kid, and the parent would give me something in return. So one guy came and pruned our fruit trees. We have an olive tree in the front yard and a couple other trees, and he pruned them for us. Someone offered me dog washing. I got a big load of mulch from another parent. So this was the exchange. That's how I
sure.
started out. And then eventually I started getting paying clients. It took me a long time to work out how to ask people for money. So I gave away a lot of coaching. In hindsight, I did that for too long. I should have put a time frame. I'll do it for 3 months, and then I need to start charging. I can't do this forever. Now when people want to book a call with me, they pay up front to talk to me, and that actually keeps the doors open, whereas
Right.
I was kind of subsidizing my own business, which is not a good way to be. It's not really a business then, it's more of a hobby.
Right.
um, And so, yeah, I'm sorry, I've totally forgotten the question.
No, no, and actually, I like that you went off on that direction because what I have heard from many of the clients, so what I do on my end, I don't do the coaching, I do the vetting. Um, and I help them, because a lot of people will say, well, where do I go find a coach? Do I just go Google it? Well, you could, okay. But in the past 2 years, I've worked with over 300 coaches in podcasting. And I
Mm,
look at their podcasts, I look at, everything that they put out. And so I sort of have this feel when I'm meeting with somebody that, okay, here's a handful of 4 or 5
mm,
individuals.
mm,
In the beginning, like you, I was doing it absolutely free.
mm,
Um, and now I have a sliding scale because there are some people come to me and I know, um, uh, just knowing where they're telling me that they live and their circumstances, $5 would even be too much for them.
mm,
But they come back eventually after
mm,
they've gone through and found the right coach and have moved along, and I'll get a note from them saying, "Can I pay you something?" And
mm,
those are the ones that absolutely. Um,
mm,
and the others, there is still a sliding scale, but I do it out of my love, and I want them to get the most from a coach like
mm,
you.
mm,
Okay.
mm.
I'm not giving them that. I'm just helping pave the way. And
Right. Yeah.
that is important. But I want to talk about teaching for 1 second
Mm,
because when I went to school, typically my teachers worked maybe from 8 to 3 or 8 to 4. Okay.
mm,
In fact, I've talked to one of my old teachers a couple of years ago, um, and she had said that when she went home from school, maybe 1 or 2 nights a week, she had papers to grade, but most of the time, she could grade those papers during a time that she was giving us all an assignment in class.
mm,
So they
mm,
weren't going home every night bundled down with paperwork.
mm,
Um, they didn't have to buy their own supplies. Their
mm,
supplies were provided for them, and they always seemed to have an abundance of them. But by the time I became a parent, I saw that the first day of school, even in a public school, I'm
mm,
being asked to give 2 boxes of Kleenex, 2 rolls of I have a whole grocery list.
mm,
And
mm.
I started thinking to myself, "Well, where's my tax money going?"
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, that happens here to a lesser extent, um, but I think the States is a lot, and some states are worse than others, I think, too, and some districts are worse than others. But I talked to I've heard of science teachers going out to buy their own beakers and test tubes because otherwise they can't run the science class. And that, to me, that's just crazy. It just doesn't make sense. So I think there needs to be a cultural shift in the way we think about education, certainly. And I don't know that I mean, throwing money at it will help because you could reduce class sizes, you could give more resources. As I was teaching, what I noticed was when I started, we had a teacher's aide to help the arts team just for maybe 2 or 3 hours a week. And they would maybe photocopy something for us or hang something or tidy up an area of the art room that was needed attention that we didn't have time to do, or unload the kiln or something like that. They could help with small tasks that would just take some of that pressure off. By the time I left, I was doing it all myself. And I think that's one of the big differences between education and just about any other profession. When you're a teacher, it doesn't matter if you're in your first year or your 21st year, you still have to stand at the photocopier every morning. There's nobody that takes those tasks away from you. There's no junior, like if you're a lawyer, there's some junior person or a clerk who will do that work. And we don't have that in education. And I think those little areas of support could be really crucial to just taking that load from teachers. And then of course, in the States, when they're funding their classroom themselves, that it's just, I, it's out of my experience, but I've heard enough tales of woe to know that it's a real thing. And I just, it's really sad, because it means that the teachers can't, they have to choose then. Do I stock up my classroom, or do I pay my own bills? Or, you know, I've heard of teachers who are running out of petrol on the way to work because they just can't afford to make ends meet week to week. That is just ludicrous to me. So, I mean, when I was a kid, the teachers were revered. And if you crossed the teacher,
Oh, yeah,
you were
absolutely.
in big trouble.
Yep.
And it's funny thing, you know, talking about the workload, when I've still got my high school report card. It's one piece of cardboard folded for each year. It's got the grade at the half year and the end of year. The principal signed each one at the bottom, and that's it. It's one, and on the back is printed some stuff from the school about, you know, what the grades mean. That's for my entire 6 years of high school. I have one piece of paper. My kids were coming home with a mini thesis every quarter, every semester, because the teachers had to write this lengthy report, which I know is cut and paste, and they're using, you know, phrases that are repeated. And it seems like they don't know the child because they accidentally leave, you know, the wrong name in one section. But that they're forced into making these massive reports that most people don't really want to read because it's way too much. Much better to have a conversation with the teacher and ask how things are going. But, you know, I just think there's so many things that could change for the better. My role now, I see, is to, if people want to stay, I help them to work out how they can do that well, in a way that they can still maintain their own mental health and well-being. And then if they want to leave, I'm basically there as a cheerleader to give them the courage, or to, that word encourage literally means to give heart, to give them the heart that they need to take those first steps. And when they book a call with me, I want them to leave smiling and hopeful, but also with some next steps to take. And I actually have just recently, it was about a year ago now, I guess, created a resume revamp digital download so that people can, rather than going paying someone else to do their resume, download it. It takes a while to do it. It's a bit fiddly because it's a template, but when you plug in the data of your education background, then when you write your next job application, you can get it ready pretty quickly because you've already got it all there. So I've just started doing a little bit of work as a project manager as well, and I totally fell into it. My husband works in the medical area, and his boss asked him, did he know how to set up a radiology clinic? And he just laughed and said no. And I said, oh, how hard can that be? I reckon I could do that. And he said, really? And I said, that'd be great. You know, it's to support the hospitals because they're overwhelmed. So they want to add more services in the community. And I told them how when I was an art teacher, I had to buy a new kiln for the art room. And we had all these occupational health and safety requirements around that, ventilation, you know, clearances and all those. I said, that's probably the closest thing I can, as an example, to what you're setting up. And they said, oh, great, that sounds good. Yeah, come on board. And so I'm earning more money now than I ever earned as a teacher doing this. And I'm doing it on my terms. I don't do it all the time. I mean, here I am in working hours doing a podcast. So it's very flexible. And it's the kind of thing that it ends, so it's a project, so I don't have to keep doing it all day. It'll stop in a few months and then I can move on to something else. So it's interesting for me. And it means I have to put myself out there and be really confident and all those things. So that can be hard for some people. But when I write I didn't even write a resume for that, to be honest. But the next one will have that on it. You know, that I'm a project manager now. I've changed my LinkedIn profile. I've changed my email signature. So now I'm a project manager because I've done it once. And that's all you have to do. You just got to do one little thing and suddenly you're it. So if you're a teacher and you're interested in program management, for instance, anytime you've organized an excursion or a concert, anything like that, that's a project. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's a time frame. if it's a program, that's more like my ukulele class week after week, okay, or a literacy program or something like that. So teachers can do program or project management standing on their head. All they've got to do is, with their resume, take out that language of the classroom, talk about the education sector, talk about training environments. I changed my arts team leader to operations manager, which is essentially what it was, but I've just switched the language. In my resume revamp, I've actually got a little lexicon in there to help people translate that language of education to corporate, for that reason, because I didn't know how to do it when I was leaving, and I needed someone like me, and that's why I do it. That's my motivation. When I was trying to get out, I needed somebody like me to help me get out, and I couldn't find them. And so I bumbled along, very laboriously until I finally dragged myself out. But it wasn't easy. Yeah.
Well, life isn't easy. I remember, this goes back to my high school days. I knew I wanted to be in communications. And so my speech teacher convinced me to join the debate team. Um, and I really loved it.
Mm.
In the first debate that I was in, uh, we lost, but we were told afterwards by all the instructors we should have won, but we did have a weak link. And I remember standing there in front of my speech teacher claiming, it's not fair. And he said, I want you to remember that life is not fair. You could be the best at what you're doing,
Mm.
and you may not get the job. You may not be appreciated. And I said, but again, I used the words, that's not fair. He said, it's okay. Go out and do your best. Do what you need to do to excel. And I've done that my whole life, but didn't realize until probably the last 10, 15 years that I had been doing it. And that's when my world started to open up and say, you know what? I can do something. I can do this. And just like you said, well, I organized these events for, the business that I worked in. So, I'm an event planner.
Yeah.
And I thought I wanted to be an event planner. Um, and I started my own business. And I realized after about a year, I didn't want to be an event planner. Um, because the events I planned them, and like you said, then I went on to do something else. And then when they needed me again. So your guidance is phenomenal. So how can my listeners find you and connect with you if you are the right coach for them?
Okay, so there's a few ways. I have a Get Out of Teaching Facebook group, which has about 25,000 members now. And so you can join that. I have someone who lets people into the group, so it might take a day or two, but I don't do that myself anymore because there were too many. One morning I woke up and there were 300 people waiting to get in the group,
Oh,
and I'm like,
wow.
oh no,
Yeah.
what am I going to do? And so that's one way to connect. I'm on LinkedIn, just Elizabeth Diakos. You can find me that way. And I also have my website is getoutofteaching.com. So that's pretty easy to find. Is that right? I think it's just .com. Yeah.
We're going to put
I've
all
got
that in the show
it
notes.
links to my other website. So yeah,
Okay.
it's yeah. And I have a podcast, the Get Out of Teaching podcast as well. The podcast has been on a break for a little while because I've been doing this new project and I just didn't have the headspace to work on the podcast as well. But I will get back into that now. As I've this project's coming to an end, I've got more time to sort of think about those questions about podcasting. And I also have a newsletter. So if you go to my website, down the bottom of the front page, there's a little bit where you can sign up to the newsletter. And I send out a weekly newsletter with just some tips and examples of what other people I've worked with are doing. Or so the last few weeks I've been talking, because I'm a bit obsessed with project management right now, I've been talking about that. The newsletter that goes out this week will be focused on how to sell yourself in the interview for the project management role. So that's really my focus for that this week's one. So yeah, lots of ways to connect with
Lots
me.
of ways. And all of it will be in the show notes. So for those of you listening, you don't have to remember every little thing that Elizabeth and I have talked about. You'll be able to connect. And, if you want to get out of teaching, a conversation with Elizabeth may be helpful. Thank you again so much. Enjoy the beautiful day on the other side of the world, and I'll enjoy it tomorrow. Okay. Take care
Thanks
now.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.